So our speakers for this discussion are Christopher Gill, who is Emeritus Professor of Ancient Thought at the University of Exeter. He's written, as many of you know, extensively on ancient philosophy, especially on the interface between ethics and psychology in Greek and Roman thought. He's edited the Oxford World Classics translations of Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, and his most recent works include Learning to Live Naturally, Stoic Ethics and Its Modern Significance in 2012, and Stoic Ethics, the Basics in 2024. So thank you, Chris, for being here today. We've also got John Sellars with us. John is a reader in the history of philosophy at Royal Holloway, University of London, and a visiting research fellow at King's College London, a very busy person. He's the author of many popular and scholarly books on Stoicism, including Lessons in Stoicism, The Pocket Stoic, and the recent edited volume, The Cambridge Companion to Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, as well as, I believe, an upcoming volume on Musonius Rufus, which I'm really looking forward to. Welcome, John. And we also have Tim LeBon, who is a psychotherapist, existential therapist, philosophical counselor, life coach, and integrative counselor. So if you're having questions about your life, Tim is definitely the guy to go to. He is also director of research at Modern Stoicism and author of books such as 365 Ways to Be More Stoic and Wise Therapy. And I should mention he's also a driving force behind recent published research documenting the benefits of practicing Stoicism, which he might be able to share more about later. So thank you so much to the three of you for being here today. And as you know, we are going to be talking about the relationship between Stoicism and engaged citizenship. So I'd like to start maybe with ancient Stoicism and just a very brief overview of how you see the ancient Stoics talking about engaged citizens and what we can do to become engaged citizens. So maybe, Chris, we could start with you and see your opinion on this.
Okay, yeah, I've got a couple of points about ancient Stoicism that I think may also be relevant for modern Stoicism too. One about citizenship and one about engagement. So the Stoics have quite a broad notion of citizenship. Citizenship isn't necessarily just about being an active person in your known nation. You can be a citizen in any kind of community, a smaller community, your family or friendship group, but also you can be a citizen in a broader sense, in terms of being a member of the human race and acting as the Stoics think a human being should act properly, the community of humankind. So there can be a number of different valid levels of citizenship. Citizenship isn't just being American or British or whatever. It's quite a broad notion. So that's one thing. The other thing is about engagement. What does engagement mean? Well, of course, it means being emotionally engaged, engaged in action, engaged in thought. But I think more profoundly, an engaged citizenship is one where your citizenship, however this is interpreted, is part of your life project. It's part of the whole process of living, trying to live a good human life, which the Stoics associate very much with developing the virtues and trying to work towards eudaimonia. So engaged citizenship is, I think, in the ancient world, is Stoicism that forms a meaningful part of your life quest. So just a couple of suggestions, and I think those ideas are both entirely valid today, although we might want to explore exactly how they would work out in modern contexts.
Thank you. So it's actually a very broad and expansive notion of citizenship and engagement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. John, would you have anything to add or a different way of putting it?
I mean, one thing I might add to that is the idea that the Stoics have, which is that our sense of citizenship is something entirely natural, right? So a lot of kind of modern political theories will talk about, there's some hypothetical social contract in which a group of isolated individuals all come together to form a community, and in the process they accept they're going to give up some of their freedoms in order to benefit from the protections of the community. So the assumption is we start off as isolated individuals, right, and then we come together. And the Stoics reject that view. So like Aristotle, the Stoics would say that by nature we are fundamentally social beings. This is the natural state to be in. So if we're going to live a life in agreement with nature, then we better be good, sociable members of a community. And the foundation for our sense of community with other people, they think, is the relationship that a parent has with their children. That immediate natural sense of kinship and desire to protect other people is the foundation for all of our wider communities that grow out from that very natural basic instinct that seems to be kind of universal. So there's great stress on the naturalness of being part of a community, I think is really central to Stoic thinking.
I agree. Super important. It's not something imposed by a law. It's something that's organic. It comes from within. Thank you. Okay, Tim, would you have anything to add?
Well, it's sometimes hard to add anything to the wisdom of Chris and John. Hard acts to follow. But from the perspective of co-facilitator of Stoic Week, which is happening in a week's time, and also, as you said, very involved in the research where we took what philosophically we thought were the dimensions of Stoicism and then empirically ended up with 7 dimensions of Stoicism. And both of those back up the idea that Stoicism isn't just about our own resilience and well-being, although it is that. It's also about, and just going through some of the dimensions of Stoicism, the virtues, what might be called cosmopolitanism or benevolence, and progressing ethically. Those would be 3 things which very much link with today's theme. And in my experience of being a Stoic coach or talking to people about Stoicism, very often they start off with the dichotomy of control, and they often misinterpret it a little bit as it's all being about, okay, I just focus on what I can control and so don't need to bother about the rest. But that isn't what Stoicism is really about. It's about influencing as best you can the stuff that is up to you, how you think about things and what you do, and doing those things with virtue and concern beyond ourselves. And just one final point to throw in is one of my favourite findings from all the Stoic weeks is the positive association between zest or energy and Stoicism. And that's rather relevant, isn't it? Because it means that the more we're Stoic, the more we'll feel a sense of purpose and being the change we want to be in the world, to slightly misquote Gandhi, who is a kind of neo-Stoic perhaps. And so the things go together. I think it's a win-win: resilience, well-being, and being a good citizen and a good person.
So we could almost equate zest with engagement, right? So if you have zest, you are engaged in the people around you and the activities around you. So to me, that does go hand in hand. So then, Tim, would you have anything to add? So all these people who are coming and discovering that Stoicism is about more than just the self, that it's about engaging with the wider community, what advice would you have for them as to how they can then do that in their communities, either in a civic capacity or in some other capacity?
Yeah, well, I think a key idea is being a good role model. And in Stoicism, it's already there, the idea that we think of Stoic role models, that the ancient Stoics looked to people like Socrates and Cato as role models. And we might look at the ancient Stoics as role models, Epictetus, etc. But we can be role models in our own smaller ways, where with our colleagues, with our customers, our clients, our children. How we act is going to influence other people one way or the other. And if we act well, then who knows, it might rub off on them. And by doing that, we can, we can embody Stoicism and actually be part of that change.
Awesome. Thank you. John, just to bring it back to you, what would you add to that as far as looking back to Stoic principles and how we could apply them in the 21st century?
I mean, I think one of the striking features of Stoic ethics, and one that I think often sometimes confuses people when they first sort of are encountering Stoic ideas, is there aren't really a kind of a set of rules, right? So it's not as if there's a single straightforward blueprint about what you ought to do. It's more about cultivating a certain set of values, and then you've got to work out in every situation you find yourself in how best to apply those values and how they're going to make a difference. So there's a sense in which there isn't really a nice, neat blueprint about how you go about and do this, right? And so, you see these sort of blog posts online, here are the 10 basic 10 basic rules of how to be a Stoic, and it's just like, well, sorry guys, it doesn't really work like that. It's actually a lot more complicated. So yeah, I mean, it's about developing this right set of values, about the virtues, about reminding ourselves of this sociability we have, and then assessing every single situation we're in and trying to work out, okay, how can I let those values inform how I'm going to respond to this unique situation, which might be completely different to any other situation I've been in. So yeah, difficult to have a kind of a straightforward answer as to what that would look like, but reminding ourselves of those principles. One of my favorite passages connected to this is the famous passage in Marcus's Meditations at the beginning of book 2, where he says, remind yourself you're going to meet loads of grumpy, difficult people, and then he adds, but also remind yourself that they didn't choose to be like this, right? They didn't wake up in the morning saying, I'm going to be difficult and awkward and troublesome. And also remind yourself that, look, we're all on the same team. We're all here together, and our goal ought to be to cooperate with one another. This is what it's all about. And so, he's reminding himself of that core principle in some context that we don't know about, where he was dealing with difficult people. And so it's having that kind of constant reminder, and obviously, Tim and many others done a lot of work on this in the Stoic Week material, right? To have those constant prompts to remind yourself, right? Whatever situation you're in, you're going to encounter someone. It might be an awkward situation, but just remember, hey, we're all on the same team. We're all in this together. We're all ultimately trying to get to the same place. And then that can then inform how we respond.
Yeah, thank you. Anytime you interact with people, you're going to need that advice, so it can apply pretty much everywhere at all times. Thank you. So, Chris, how would you see us applying ancient principles to the 21st century?
Well, going back to the ideas I put forward earlier, yeah, so citizenship can be at different levels, and I think to recognize the validity of both of those. So there's a lot of talk at the moment about nationalism and patriotism, as it were, as if it's the only, in some contexts, it's presented as if it's the only political virtue. And I think that's one of the problems with that is it just focuses on one kind of citizenship, your membership of a nation state. But also the Stoics remind us that we're also citizens of the human community, and that all human beings have an element in common. They have rationality, they have sociability, they can develop the virtues. So I think that's actually a very contemporary, very relevant, an important point that Stoicism can help us keep us in mind. People who aren't members of our nation can still be just as much human beings, just as worthwhile, just as much objects of concern as we are. Those within. The other thing is about the idea that of linking our membership, our citizenship, and our life project, and understanding the life project as a matter of trying to develop the virtues, which Tim mentioned, also trying to develop the virtues and trying to go towards happiness, eudaimonia, which the Stoics think depends on the virtues. I think this the question question John raised about having the rules and framework. I think this can help give us, there aren't rules in Stoicism, but there are principles. There is this framework. The virtues are really fundamental, really, for making sense of Stoicism. And I think that this helps to give us a kind of lodestar, really, in the way we conduct our citizenship. People might say, well, look, if we can be citizens in all sorts of different ways, well, there's nothing, it's all wishy-washy and vague. Well, no, it isn't. It's got a foundation. It's got a basis, namely in the virtues and in trying to understand the virtues, trying to work towards the virtues. So sticking to our principles is absolutely crucial. And that's also, I think, a highly relevant thing, a highly relevant piece of advice today, because almost anyone finds themselves in situations where there's a kind of babble of political discourse and many voices going in very different directions. And I think Stoicism helps us to think, well, hang on, there are some things that really are crucially important, and trying to make sure that your political activity and your political engagement is in line with trying to understand the virtues is really fundamental.
I agree. Thank you. And I just wanted to bring in a question from the audience. We have a couple more minutes, if it's okay with the three of you. I know we're going to be hearing about Hierocles today and his famous circles, the circles of Hierocles. So maybe we can go ahead and mention that. So we have a question from Vanessa Cordero, who says, how can we extend our oikeiôsis to the outermost circle of Hierocles, which encompasses humanity as a whole, without forgetting the first and elemental circle of oikeiôsis? So the self-love and the love of those closest to us. So I think this is obviously a fundamental question in ethics, the tension between those closest to us and those farther away. So I'd like to get your opinion on that, if you don't mind, Chris. How would we think about that in a very practical way?
I think a very practical way is to form a notion of what the first circle is, who's in the first circle. Well, the first circle is yourself, but say that the immediate circle then is your family, your friends. So think about, think carefully about who is in the first circle. And of course, the Hierocles idea isn't that everyone is in the first circle. It isn't an attempt to kind of pull everyone into the first circle. We can't do that. It's a question of seeing that all the circles are connected and that we can gradually pull people further in. So I think that we need to think carefully both about the people in the first circle and the people on the outer circle, if you like, and also see what they have in common. What makes them both important to us. And I think part of that is seeing that we're all human beings. We all have rationality and sociability. We can all develop the virtues.
Okay, thank you. Tim, what would you say about oikeiosis, the circles of Hierocles, for people who are coming to this for the first time? How could they start to practice this in their lives?
Yeah, I mean, in Stoic Week, and something I use as a CBT, cognitive behavioral therapist, we have this idea of the oxygen mask, and what you hear if you go on an aeroplane, if there's an emergency and the oxygen mask comes out, even if you've got very young children with you, put it on yourself first, because you won't be able to rescue anyone else if you've perished. So I think that's a good starting point to actually make sure you are looking after your own needs, not in a selfish way, but your own resilience needs. And of course, you'll do that well by being a Stoic. So I think that's the only thing that I would want to add to the idea that you can. And again, another thing that we suggest people do in Stoic Week is to look at those circles and meditate on them and think about how they can extend kindness to people outside their inner circle.
You have some good exercises. I think you have the random act of kindness, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Well, we changed that this
Okay.
year, interestingly. You're absolutely right. You remember rightly. It was random act of kindness last year, but we thought about it and thought, well, actually, we should have rational acts of kindness. because some of the random acts of kindness might not be so helpful. And actually, as Stoics, we want to think about the ones that are most in line with all the virtues.
So what would be an example of a rational act of kindness?
Well, it might be to think about people in your road. Maybe there's a neighbor next door who is struggling a little bit, maybe going and knocking on their door and just seeing how they are. Could be as simple as that. It could be a friend who's been a bit quiet recently, and you just send them a message. I was just thinking of you, how are things going? So someone who is in need might be kind of more rational than just a purely random buying someone a coffee in your coffee shop, which is fine, but may not be the best use of your virtue.
Right. Okay, I love that. Thank you. And John, we have a couple of minutes. Would you give us your opinion on oikeiosis? How can we practice this in an engaged way today?
I mean, I'll respond that slightly differently, perhaps. I mean, I think one way in which people often understand this idea, and I think I certainly did at the beginning as well, is we see this series of circles. You start at the center and you're kind of expanding outwards, and these circles are getting wider and wider and wider. And there's a sense in which it's quite easy to interpret that as you kind of spreading yourself out and spreading yourself very thin and perhaps losing yourself in the process. But as Chris said quite rightly, what Hierocles is saying is not that you spread yourself out over all of these circles, but that you try and pull the circles closer to the center, right? So you're not losing yourself in the process. Your care for yourself and those immediately around you remains the focus. And so, as Tim was saying, you put your gas mask on, you put your oxygen mask on first, but you just want to then bring everyone else, and that little bit tighter in. So I think by reminding ourselves that it's pulling people closer and not spreading yourself outwards, I think that helps give clarity about precisely how we might make use of this idea.
Thank you. That is an important clarification. And to me, it also means that we're not trying to feel impartial towards everyone in the world. We're not trying to feel exactly the same towards all 8 billion people on Earth, but it's that we recognize that even people farther away from us are deserving of our care and attention and love and respect and all of this. So yeah, I think that is a very important distinction. Okay, well, thank you so much to Chris, John, and Tim for joining us at the last minute, I might add. They were very gracious to step in. So I appreciate all of you being here, sharing your opinions with us.